The Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution, also known as the Mexican Civil War, was a major armed struggle lasting roughly from 1910 to 1920. In 1876, Porfirio Diaz took over the nation and continued to do so for over 30 years. His administration achieved a few public improvements but was more noted for its suppression of revolts. Even the legislature was composed of his friends and the press was muffled. He also maintained tight control over the courts. Diaz secured his power by catering to the needs of separate groups and playing off one interest against another. He won the mestizo support by supplying them with political jobs, and overall the disparity between rich and poor benefited the wealthy side with land and other advantages. After the dissatisfaction of the Mexican people, Diaz promised to resign after his term was over. Francisco Madero, a revolutionist writer and statesman, decided to run against Diaz in 1910, but was then put in jail unfairly by Diaz. Madero then escaped jail and launched the plan of San Luis Potosí from the U.S. with the objective to overthrow Diaz. On May 25, 1911, Diaz resigned, bringing Madero to presidency. Madero's administration soon encountered opposition from more radical revolutionaries and from remnants of the former regime. In February 1913, a military coup took place in the Mexican capital led by General Victoriano Huerta, a military commander of the city. Madero was arrested and a short time later assassinated along with his vice president, Jose Maria Pino Suarez. On February 22, 1913, following the series of events known as the 10 Tragic Days. A revolt led by Felix Diaz, nephew of former dictator Porfirio Diaz, tried to bring down the government of President Francisco Madero. Madero was betrayed by his chief general Victoriano Huerta, who switched sides and fought for the rebels. The 10 Tragic Days is a series of events that took place in Mexico City between February 9 and February 19, 1913, during the Mexican Revolution. This led up to a coup d'etat and the assassination of President Francisco Madero and his vice president, Jose Maria Pino Suarez. In 1914, Victoriano Huerta replaced Madero but was also a week later. 1915, the Year of Hunger began with chaos everywhere and starvation in common places in Mexico City. Revolutionary leaders, including Venustiano Carranza in Veracruz, Álvaro Obregón in Mexico City, Pancho Villa in Chihuahua, Zapata supporters in Morelos, and many others. War refugees and political exiles fled to the United States to escape the violence. Mexicans also left rural areas in search of stability and employment. As a result, Mexican migration to the United States rose sharply. The number of legal migrants grew from around 20,000 migrants per year during the 1910s to about 50,000 to 100,000 migrants per year during the 1920s. The revolution continued with different movements fighting different causes around the nation. Huerta was finally forced to resign and fled into exile while Carranza assumed the executive powers. Villa and Zapata refused to recognize Carranza's authority, however, and plunged the country into another civil war. Carranza, aided by Obregón, emerged supreme by August 1915, and although Zapata and Villa continued their rebellions in the south and north, Carranza was pressed by Obregón to accept the Constitution of 1917, which contained potentially radical reform measures that Carranza opposed and subsequently failed to enforce. In 1920, Carranza attempted to prevent Obregón from succeeding him as president, and Obregón revolted. Carranza fled Mexico City and was ambushed and murdered by a local chieftain in Tlaxcala-Tongo. After Carranza's murder, De la Huerta was provisional president until Obregón took office by election. Upon the designation of Calles as official presidential candidate, De la Huerta revolted. The uprising was crushed by Obregón in the spring of 1914, and De la Huerta was sent into exile in the United States. He was recalled by Lázaro Cárdenas to serve a diplomatic post in 1935. 1920 was considered as the end of the revolution, but sporadic violence and clashes between federal troops and various rebel forces continued until the reformist president, Lázaro Cárdenas, took office in 1934 and institutionalize the reforms that were fought for during the revolution and were legitimized in the Constitution of 1917. Obregón managed to impose relative peace and prosperity on his nation, which had gone through 10 years of savage civil war. He gave official sanction of organization of laborers and peasants. Moreover, his appointment of José Vasconcelos as Minister of Education heralded an era of significant reform in Mexican schooling. Because he appeared too radical, however, the United States refused to recognize his government until the Bucareli Conference in 1923, in which Obregón promised not to expropriate the Mexican holdings of American oil companies. He is considered by many as the best president in Mexico's history, and several historians analysts have called him as the perfect politician, since he had all that political figure needs to highly influential, respected, admired, accepted, and even loved by the masses. Overall, the Mexican Revolution goal was to end dictatorship in Mexico, and it gained a stable Mexico and a constitutional republic.